Good evening, America. Happy Friday. Welcome to the latest edition of Just the News, No Noise. I'm your host, John Solomon, reporting to you, as always, from our nation's capital, and this time from the wiredtofishcoffee.com studios. Wired to Fish Coffee is the official coffee of Just the News. And tonight, you can try their brand new dark roast. It just came out today, and you get 10% off just by going to wiredtofishcoffee.com and using the promo code JustNews. That's very exciting news. And speaking of excitement, there was a little bit of it today on Vice Presidential nominee J.D. Vance's plane. It had to make an emergency landing in Milwaukee with a technical failure involving the door seal. Everything turned out okay, and Vance got right back on the campaign trail after things were fixed. But questions remain because the jetliner was, a 737. We all know the news about failing door seals that have plagued a lot of the 737 models. We'll be keeping you up to date on that over at justthenews.com. Now, today, the Harris Wall ticket got a quick lesson also on political physics. Yes, what goes up usually must come down. And Kamala Harris's lead over Donald Trump, well, it's vanished. In fact, there's been a 6-point swing in polling numbers in just 2 weeks, and Donald Trump is now back out front nationally. According to a new poll from our friend Scott Rasmussen, Trump also is leading in most of the battleground states. A good time to bring in my amazing co-host Amanda Head to talk to you about that. Amanda, I know you're in L.A. Did you feel that earthquake when the poll came out this morning?
Indeed I did. I've been feeling a lot of earthquakes, though, recently. I'm afraid that what the seismologists are saying is probably true, that this is picking up speed and I should get out. All right, so, good to be here with you and all of you tuning in tonight. Let's start this evening by going over some of what Vice President Kamala Harris proposed in a speech about her economic vision if she becomes president. And, it's a little scary. Here she is advocating for price caps on food.
And I will work to pass the first ever federal ban on price gauging on food. My plan will include new penalties for opportunistic companies that exploit crises and break the rules. And we will support smaller food businesses that are trying to play by the rules and get ahead.
Targeting job creators, good plan. Anyway, her justification for that policy is that food prices are still too high, and instead of blaming inflation, an issue that the Biden-Harris administration couldn't get under control, she's instead blaming grocery stores. Watch this.
Prices are still too high. A loaf of bread costs 50% more today than it did before the pandemic. Ground beef is up almost 50%. Many of the big food companies are seeing their highest profits in 2 decades.
You're an office lady. Now, there are many problems with price controls. Just see what happened to the Soviet Union's economy, or for a more recent example, Venezuela. And when even news channels like CNN are against your proposals, you know that there are probably some major issues with them. Here is the aforementioned CNN explaining.
Totally unworkable, first of all, for the FTC to be deciding like how much Kroger charges for eggs in Michigan. But it also would be very bad for markets. We've seen this kind of thing tried in lots of other countries before: Venezuela, Argentina, the Soviet Union, etc. It leads to shortages. It leads to black markets.
Soviet-style grocery shopping, just what we all wanted to have if she wins. All right, good luck with that one, Harris campaign. And quickly turning to some other election news, President Trump's campaign has enlisted the help of former Democrat presidential candidate and Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard to get some tips on how to debate Vice President Kamala Harris. Just the News reported earlier today that her contributions to the Trump campaign have so far been limited to practice sessions at Mar-a-Lago. Gabbard famously went after Harris during the 2020 Democrat primary cycle very effectively. John, I'm going to throw it back to you so we can get to our first guest.
Yeah, pretty big news there. Busy news day for Friday in August. You said August is slow. How about that? All right. Joining us now is a former senior investigator for the House Foreign Affairs Committee. We often talk about why there isn't more accountability in Washington, and that occurs when Congress doesn't do its job. When it says it's going to investigate something and then it doesn't really get to the bottom of it. Earlier this week, Jerry Dunleavy, a fantastic investigative reporter. We've had him on the show before. He went over to the House Armed Services Committee to do that investigation. He also wrote a great book. You all remember it. We had it on the show here, Kaboo, The Untold Story of Biden's Fiasco. There it is right there. Well, he resigned in protest, saying that the House Armed Services Committee, wasn't doing a good enough job investigating the catastrophic withdrawal from Afghanistan. And we're very lucky to be joined by Jerry himself. Jerry, welcome to the show. Good to have you on.
Thank you, John. Good to be here.
For a long time, you were on this side of the desk. You were covering Congress. You got inside of Congress. You had a pretty good idea what needed to be investigated. What happened?
Yeah, so I covered the Afghanistan withdrawal as an investigative reporter. I wrote a book on the disastrous withdrawal as well. I was asked by Chairman McCall, the chairman of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, to join their investigation into the Biden-Harris administration's disastrous withdrawal. I was asked to join last year, and part of me agreeing to go over to Congress was, I said from the get-go, I wanted this to be a serious investigation that would investigate everything that needed to be investigated. And Chairman McCall said that privately, and he's promised that publicly as well. And unfortunately, the promises that Chairman McCall and the committee have made to pursue answers and accountability for the Abbey Gate Gold Star families, for all of the veterans of the war in Afghanistan, and for the American people, those promises have not been kept. Witnesses that we should have brought in, the committee refused to bring in. Many times, witnesses that the committee did bring in were treated with kid gloves. And it got to the point where I felt that I needed to let the public know that this very important investigation into one of the biggest foreign policy disasters in recent memory, this investigation was not serious. So that's why I resigned in protest.
Yeah.
Jerry, oftentimes, whether it's an investigation, whether it's a company trying to do due diligence or take inventory, oftentimes there are process blockades along the way. There's also a problem sometimes when people aren't motivated. There is a human problem. Did you find this to be more personnel related or process related?
Ultimately, the biggest problem here was that Chairman McCall's public promises did not match what he was willing to do in private. When it came to some of the witnesses that we brought in, like Zalmay Khalilzad, General Kenzie, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Milley, these are all people who made significant mistakes in 2021 and played their part in why things went so south. Chairman McCall's approach to them was treat them with kid gloves and to largely let them off the hook. The committee refused to go after State Department witnesses that we should have brought in, folks like Wendy Sherman, Victoria Nuland. The committee refused to pursue in any serious way bringing in some of the military commanders that we needed to bring in to understand the dynamics during the evacuation and the Abbey Gate bombing. That's folks like General Donahue, General Farrell Sullivan, and Rear Admiral Peter Vaisley. Tough questions we didn't ask, documents we didn't pursue. I wish that I was coming on the show right now to talk about the many great successes of the investigation. That's what I was hopeful for. That's what I wanted to happen. Unfortunately, despite my urging, Chairman McCall and the committee were just not willing to do the basic things. I'm talking bare minimum stuff to have this be a serious investigation. Unfortunately, it was not. It was not serious.
One of the great questions that your book raised, and that has remained unanswered in the public sphere beyond your reporting, is how did we get the intelligence wrong? How could there have been a belief in the Biden administration that the Afghans would hold the line? That's why we could pull out. We'll give up Bagram. Everything's okay. And it's gone in a couple of days. Were you able to get any visibility into how that was mishandled? How did we get it so wrong?
So unfortunately, while the House Foreign Affairs Committee and Chairman McCall did sort of take the lead on investigating the withdrawal, there has also been inaction from some of the other committees that you think would be looking into this as well. The House Armed Services Committee has done essentially zero oversight related to the withdrawal, and the House Intelligence Committee, at least publicly, has done very little oversight as well. And so when you see Chairman Milley in the summer of 2021 having no idea how many districts the Taliban was in charge of, totally underestimating the speed and scale of the Taliban's advances. When you see Chairman Milley talking about the Afghan military and police being 325,000 to 350,000 strong, when they were never that strong and certainly weren't in the face of the Taliban onslaught and the loss of U.S. support, where are these terrible assessments coming from? And where is this terrible intelligence coming from? I always told the committee and told Chairman McCall, and I wrote in my book, that this was a leadership failure by President Biden, but this was also a political failure, a military failure, a diplomatic failure, and an intelligence failure. And my efforts to get the House Foreign Affairs Committee to simply at least team up with House Intelligence and try to get access to the intelligence assessments, try to get answers on how our intelligence community botched this so badly. Unfortunately, the Chairman McCall, senior staff, the committee, simply not interested. And part of why I'm so concerned is that intelligence failures like this don't just happen once. This is the sort of thing that is going to affect us. Just like if we don't learn the lessons from this war, I greatly worry that in the next war against a major adversary, there's going to be even more unnecessary Gold Star families unless we get the answers and accountability we need. And unfortunately, this investigation is just not going to get there for us.
Yeah, spot on, unfortunately. Jerry, I know you mentioned in your letter the timing of this and the reason why you came out now. Republicans have barely a handful of days before the November election. If they lose, it's just a very skinny timeline. Do you have any hope left that with your departure, public departure, your letter out there on social media in the public eye, that maybe that will light a bit of a fire and they'll ramp it up heading into the election?
Yeah. Yes. Look, the committee wasted a lot of time. It did. But there is still a little bit of time. And there's at least time to begin to do the right thing, to begin to do the basics, to begin to do the bare minimum. And look, they should just do it. I'm not asking them to credit for me for any of it, but just start to do the right thing because it's the right thing to do, because the Gold Star families deserve answers, the American people do, and we need to make sure this sort of thing never happens again. That starts with a serious investigation.
Yeah, it does. It's what they owe the American people. They owe those 13 families. I was thinking of you the night of the catastrophic debate for Joe Biden, because there's a moment in that Q&A where he says no soldiers lost their lives on my watch, and he just ignored the 13 lives that did die at Abbey Gate. You've probably had a chance to see that. You probably had a chance to talk to those families. But for those who lost their life and for those on the front lines right now, did that send a bad message to our men and women in armed services?
Absolutely. I mean, President Biden's comments in that debate, erasing the 13 U.S. service members who lost their lives at Abbey Gate, also, mind you, erasing the service members who were killed in an Iranian-backed attack in Jordan as well. President Biden has refused to ever say the names of those 13 U.S. service members out loud and in public. He was checking his watch during that dignified transfer ceremony at Dover, something, by the way, that Jen Psaki in her book tried to lie and say never happened. And one of the, few successes of the committee was getting her to apologize for that. Look, this investigation needs to get answers for those 13 Gold Star families, but we also need to make sure that military commanders and everyone else in a position of power who played their role in why things went so badly in 2021, we need to make sure that they are held accountable. Because if there's not accountability and there's no lessons learned, and we don't absorb the lessons of losing a 20-year war, the next war that we're in against a serious adversary like Iran or Russia or China, the stakes will be even higher. And we need to be ready, because I am legitimately concerned that if we don't learn these lessons, if we don't get serious, if we don't get answers, a lot more people are going to die unnecessarily. So we can start preventing that and start fixing our national security now by looking back and getting serious about answers on the the disastrous withdrawal and evacuation from Afghanistan. That's all that I'm asking the committee to do. I've given them a lot of ideas on how to do that. There's a lot of other good ideas out there on how to do that. They just need to start doing it.
Yeah, they do their job. They owe it to those 13 families and so many more. Jerry, it takes a lot of courage to do what you did, but I know why you did it. You want this country to be safer, better, and smarter, and for those 13 lives not to have been lost in vain. Great honor to have you on. We're going to get you on to talk more about where the investigation could go in the future, but thanks for joining us today. Great to have you on.
Absolutely, anytime. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Folks, go get his book. If you haven't read it, Kabul is one of the best reads. It reads like a spy novel, but it's all true. That's the sad part about it. All right, we're going to take a quick commercial break. When we come back, our good friend Mike Davis is going to be here from the Article 3 Project. A lot of legal things going on. We're going to pick his brain about all of them right after these messages. Welcome back, America. Earlier this week, we reported on how the Republican National Committee and Republican Party are going to the Supreme Court because Arizona doesn't want to enforce a law on the books that says you must show your citizenship proof in order to vote, in order to get a ballot. It's kind of crazy considering it's on the books, but it's going to have to go to the Supreme Court to be decided. We're very lucky to be joined by a guy who knows a thing or two, not only about the Supreme Court. He helped vet justices for that role in the Senate. He also clerked for Justice Gorsuch. Joining us right now, our good friend, the founder and the president of the Article 3 Project, Mike Davis. Mike, good to have you on.
Thank you for having me back.
So I'd like to start with a little bit of election integrity. Obviously, Republicans have won a lot of lawsuits. They seem to be a little bit more on offense this time than they were in 2020. Not perfect, but getting there. But this Supreme Court case, the notion that Arizona doesn't want to enforce its own law and require citizenship checks, everyone I've talked to, like, you got to be kidding me. This has to go to the Supreme Court to do that? But the answer is, I guess we do, right?
Yeah, so remember in this Biden-Kamala lawfare and election interference against Trump, they tried to bankrupt him. They tried to throw him in prison for the rest of his life. They threw his top aides in prison, Steve Bannon and Peter Navarro. Bannon's still in prison. Navarro got out. You saw the Biden-Kamala regime going after Trump's lawyers like John Eastman, Jeff Clark, Rudy Giuliani, his supporters on January 6th, parents outraged by gender chaos in schools and the resulting rapes in bathrooms, Christians praying outside of abortion clinics while they give amnesty to the Biden family, BLM, Antifa, Hamas. Look, all this lawfare backfired on Biden and Kamala. And the next phase in this lawfare is that the Supreme Court stepped up and stopped this lawfare. So the Democrats, Biden-Kamala Democrats, want to destroy the Supreme Court. They underfunded Trump's Secret Service protection. Biden said put a bullseye on Trump because he was a threat to democracy, a dictator. That all failed. They couldn't even get him killed. And so the next thing they're going to do is they're going to try to rig and steal the election. And they're going to do that by registering illegal immigrants and other non-citizens to vote and make it very hard to get those illegal immigrants and other non-citizens off the rolls before November 5th. And that's where the Article 3 Project, the group I'm leading, is going to step up in this next battle of the Biden-Kamala lawfare is election integrity. And we need to send a very strong message to these election officials, observers, judges, lawyers, that they need to follow the law. And if they follow the law, we're going to have your back at the Article 3 Project. And if you don't follow the law, we're going to come after you legally, politically, and financially.
Yeah. Mike, we always talk about red lights blinking everywhere with respect to national security. But with this case, red lights are blinking. There's got to be an emergency decision. What do you expect that timeline to look like?
That's a very good question. The Supreme Court of the United States needs to step up, because if you allow non-citizens, illegal immigrants, to take over our elections, we're going to lose our country. We cannot allow this to happen. It's illegal for these illegals to vote in federal elections, including for the federal election for the presidency on November 5th, 2024. And frankly, the Maricopa County recorder needs to do his job. He needs to follow Arizona law. It's very clear that you need to ask for proof of citizenship when you register to vote in Arizona, and you need to monitor those voter rolls on a monthly basis to make sure that illegal immigrants and other non-citizens are not illegally voting for federal office. And I'll tell you what, when President Trump is back in the White House, his Justice Department should open a criminal probe on election officials who are not following the law. These election officials who are violating the civil rights and the voting rights of these American citizens who are having their votes canceled by illegal immigrants voting. This is not a conspiracy theory. Virginia Governor Glenn Youngkin just had 6,000 illegal immigrants and other non-citizens on his voter rolls, and he took them off. Yeah. And this needs to happen in Arizona, and the Maricopa County Recorder needs to step up and do that.
Yeah, really important. Mike, it's hard to believe, but we're less than a month from the scheduled sentencing for Donald Trump in that hush money case. Tonight, the House Judiciary Committee asked very specific questions of Judge Merchant and his daughter. He wants to know whether any of the $13 million he's reportedly been paid was specifically to work on Donald Trump's specific work in this election. Why are they asking that question, and how could it potentially affect a question about whether the judge should recuse?
This Democrats' Manhattan judge, Juan Merchan, is corrupt, and I don't say that lightly, and I'll tell you why. There is a clear New York statute that if someone within 6 degrees of separation from the judge has a financial interest in a case, that judge must recuse. When President Trump raised this issue with Judge Juan Merchan's daughter, Lauren Merchan, being a leading Democrat fundraiser and fundraising off of this case, how did Judge Merchan respond? He didn't recuse like he was supposed to, like he's required to under New York statute. He threatened Trump and said he would throw Trump in prison if Trump mentions Lauren Merchan's name going forward. This is unacceptable. And on September 18th, this judge is going to move forward with, after this jury finding of guilt, when the jury didn't even know what the crime was. And so this judge is going to move forward on September 18th and convict and sentence President Trump, even after the Supreme Court ruled in the presidential immunity decision that you cannot take evidence that is subject to presidential immunity and use it in a court proceeding. And that's exactly what Alvin Bragg, that Soros-funded Manhattan DA, Matthew Colangelo, the Biden-Kamala senior Justice Department official, and this corrupt Judge Juan Merchan did in this bogus show trial in New York. This judge is required to declare a mistrial on or before September 18th sentencing. And if he doesn't do that, this case is going to get to the Supreme Court of the United States very quickly. And the Supreme Court, I have zero doubt that the Supreme Court will stay the execution of this judgment, will stop Judge Merchan pending the appeal of this case.
Wow.
Mike, I've seen some rumors out there that Rikers Island is preparing for a presidential inmate. Now, I know that everything on the internet is true, so we should definitely put a lot of stock in that. But worst case scenario, Juan Merchan does convict or sentence him to a year behind bars. I'm kind of skeptical of whether he would be remanded immediately. I feel like he would be on release pending appeal. What do you think?
I think that Judge Merchan wants to get that conviction to give Kamala Harris a big talking point, deliver for his daughter, Lauren Merchan, who's raising millions of dollars for Biden and Harris, and particularly off this criminal trial. This guy is corrupt. And if he actually does go forward with this bogus criminal conviction and sentence, he better lawyer up, because he's going to face his own criminal investigation under the Trump 47 Justice Department, or he should.
Wow. Mike, there's a lot of questions about the Supreme Court that Joe Biden has tried to raise to delegitimize it, but there's an interesting case of hypocrisy. I just want to ask you about this. We wrote about it earlier in the week. Joe Biden wants to force the justices to disclose trips even when they're paid for by friends, but Joe Biden himself hasn't forced himself to disclose who pays for his trips when he goes to Martha Vineyards, or who pays for the house, or whether there's any gratuity that's involved. Do you think Americans realize that there's a double standard there?
Well, let's look at this. We have a Supreme Court justice who's taken trips with his best friend of more than 25 years with zero business before the Supreme Court. And we have another justice who has a feisty conservative wife who likes to fly flags, including a patriotic flag and another distress flag when the neighbor called her a very bad name. And so somehow that's an ethics thing that requires the destruction of the Supreme Court of the United States. I think Joe Biden shouldn't throw rocks when he lives in a glass house. His own family has taken more than $20 million from what seems like every corrupt government around the world: Russia, Ukraine, Kazakhstan, China. I think Joe Biden should sit this one out.
Yeah, I think a lot of Americans are thinking exactly the same thing, Mike. Mike, we love all the work you do at the Article 3 Project. You always bring such great analysis to us. Great to have you on tonight. Have a good weekend, my friend. Good to have you with us today.
Thank you. You too.
Yeah. All right, folks, don't go anywhere. Kamala Harris campaign's a little bit of trouble for using a sheriff's image in an ad, which made it seem like he endorses her policies. Well, guess what? He doesn't. That sheriff's coming on right after this. We'll have him right after these messages.
Welcome back to Just the News, No Noise. Let's get to more on Vice President and Democrat presidential nominee Kamala Harris. She finds herself in a little bit of hot water over an ad that her campaign has been rolling out that tries to show how tough she was on crime and the border as California AG and as Vice President. Here's a bit of it.
Kamala Harris has spent decades fighting violent crime. As a border state prosecutor, she took on drug cartels and jailed gang members for smuggling weapons and drugs across the border. As vice president, she backed the toughest border control bill in decades. And as president, she will hire thousands more border agents and crack down on fentanyl and human trafficking. Fixing the border is tough. So is Kamala Harris.
I'm Kamala Harris, and I approve this message.
Yeah, well, there are quite a few problems with that ad, and one of them is that it features a California sheriff who doesn't agree with Harris's policy positions at all then or now. So joining us now is that sheriff, Tulare County's Mike Boudreau. Sheriff, thank you so much for being here, sir.
Yeah, I'm always thankful to be on. Appreciate you both.
Yeah, you too.
Sir, I know that probably the biggest problem you had with this ad is not even necessarily your image being used without your permission. It's the fact that, number one, the ad is selling a story that simply isn't true. And number two, the fact that Kamala Harris's policies on the border are vastly different from yours, and therefore she shouldn't be using your likeness. But tell us how you felt when you first saw this ad.
No, I think you're really spot on with your assessment. If they're going to show a picture of me fighting crime, then I'm all about it. And if she's going to be a part of that with the Department of Justice, then I support that. If we're going to provide public safety to those who need it in California, then that picture's something that's a positive. The problem that I have is that she has a history and a track record of not being supportive of law enforcement. She, as you remember, during the BLM riots where there was violent acts taking place all over the country, specifically here in California, where buildings were being burned and people were being injured and violence was taking place and officers were being killed. And she was creating a fund where, or at least contributing to a fund, where she wanted to bail people out who were committing these violent acts. She also was supporting defund the police. She has a track record of defunding the police and supporting groups who want to defund the police. And she was the architect, if you're familiar in California, with Proposition 47 and now Proposition 57, both of which releases criminals without holding them accountable. When you start taking a look at what she really is and the history of her track record, that picture that she's showing tough on crime and going to solve the issues of the border with fentanyl and drugs and cartels and gangs, it's deceptive. And I couldn't in good faith let any of my constituency or anyone who has taken a look at that ad have it imply that I or anyone in law enforcement is supporting her based on her track record, because that's truly not the case.
Yeah, it's important. It's important for the public to know that. Sir, today there was yet another police union that endorsed the Trump ticket, and that's been happening all across the country. But as the men and women in law enforcement, as they look out over the last 5 or 6 years and they look at these two candidates, how do you think most of them assess this race?
I can tell you you're going to find a very difficult law enforcement agency across this country who's going to support Kamala Harris. Donald Trump has a track record of supporting men and women in law enforcement, doing a hard job all across this country. Not only the men and women in law enforcement, but he has a track record of supporting the men and women in our military and in uniform. He understands. You know, I have a real small story that I always share, that when he was running for president the first time, I was running a safety dignitary detail where he was coming into town. I was in uniform standing off to the side as his detail came through to make their way over to where he was going to give his speech. Donald Trump made his way through a crowd about 20, 30 feet over to me, shook my hand, and said he wanted to thank me and the men and women in law enforcement because he knows we have a tough job and that he as president will support us. There was no cameras, there was no video, there was no record of that happening, but he did it. When this detail went down, where Kamala Harris has me and others of law enforcement behind her in that image, on that day, she came in last minute, didn't shake the hands or say hi to anyone who's standing behind her. And when it was done, her detail escorted her out. Those are staunch differences in personalities of the two. And I can't help but say that Donald Trump means it from the heart. He means it when he says that he wants people in this country to be safe, that he wants law enforcement to be able to enforce the rules of the land, the laws of the land, and hold people accountable. Kamala Harris, in defunding the police, in supporting BLM rioters, and if you remember, she was on television encouraging people to continue their protest. Well, that was a message to say, continue your violence until we get our way. That's not supporting the men and women in law enforcement.
No, not at all. Sheriff, this is something I can't figure out, though, because this ad shows her as someone who is strong on border security, strong on law and order. If she is putting out this ad, trying to send this message about herself and her campaign, presumably because that is popular, because that's what will win votes, if she's going to talk the talk, why not walk the walk? And she has not walked the walk.
Well, let's talk about when that picture was taken. That picture was taken back in 2013. So is there any more modern pictures that she has between then and now that supports her argument that she will be that candidate to make us safer? Is there anything that she has done between then and now that has a picture showing that she's going to be the one that is going to secure our border? Let me tell you a story that happened here in Tulare County, and we're in the central part of California. A friend of mine, his brother, was shot and killed in the parking lot of an AMPM right here in the city of Visalia. He was shot and killed by someone who had been deported 3 times over, and he was a wanted felon by Homeland Security and Border Patrol. But that man made his way back into the United States in an open and unsecure border. My officers got in a chase and a major shootout with this man. Now, he ended up crashing his car and he ended up dying in that situation. I can also tell you that we just dismantled a drug cartel, ranging all the way into Mexico, where we interviewed many of those people that were involved in the cartel, and they said now more than ever, over the last 3 years, that it's easier now than any time in the 35 years of that cartel operating, that they can easily bring drugs, guns, human beings across that border easier now than ever before in the time in history.
That's powerful stuff.
So if she's going to promote that she's the candidate to secure the border, what have you done in the last 3.5 years? What have you done in the last 10 years to help support and show the people that you're trying to encourage to vote for you that in fact you're being truthful?
Yeah.
I'm telling you that in fact she's being deceitful in these ads, and that we are going to be in worse shape with her as president than we ever would be with Donald Trump.
Sheriff, 2 things I want to just ask real quickly. Obviously, there was the administration accused Border Patrol agents falsely of whipping migrants when they weren't. That was a terrible travesty that really brought shame on the agency and the vice president and president's office. And then similarly, she called ICE agents the akin of KKK a couple times. You know a lot of ICE, a lot of CPB guys. How was that played in that community? How hurtful was those sort of moments?
Well, I can tell you for the men and women in ICE, they're hardworking people who believe in justice. They believe in doing the right thing. Homeland Security and Border Patrol, their hands have been tied and unable to do their job since this administration has been put in place. I can tell you that whole situation is demoralizing. When you put on a badge and you take the oath of office, working hard to be proud of the uniform you wear, providing safety and security, but yet you have the leaders of this country saying that you are now the person who's the criminal. You now are the one who is treating people inappropriately. When we have people from all over the world coming into this country, disobeying every law and foundation that we have for justice and the legal right and way of doing things. Quite frankly, in talking to many of those people, it's demoralizing. It's unfair, and you can't expect an agency to be encouraged to get out there and work hard when you have a leader who is continually pandering to politics versus holding truth and justice and holding up the law as a priority in their campaign.
Yeah, such a great point.
That's right. You know, I know the President of the United States serves as the Commander-in-Chief of our armed services, but I also think that the President can give a boost or a bash to law enforcement domestically. And it's really nice to hear stories about President Trump, because it does feel like he is just, you know, blue collar along with law enforcement, and the way that he showed his appreciation to you. That was a great story. Thank you so much for everything you do. Tulare County Sheriff Mike Boudreau, we appreciate your time tonight. Thanks, sir.
Thank you, guys. We appreciate you and we love your show.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. All right, everybody. After the break, we are going to have another story and another guest. I think we've got, 2 more blocks left before we head out for the weekend. We are back.
Hey, America, in the days following the attempted assassination of former President Donald Trump, the Republican Party has rallied around a powerful message: fight and unite. So how do conservatives across our nation come together to both fight and unite? Well, by joining AMAC, of course, the Association of Mature American Citizens. By joining AMAC, you're uniting with over 2.1 million American patriots, just like you and me. AMAC listens to their members and fights every day to defend constitutional values and freedoms, holding our leaders accountable to pass common sense legislation. The larger AMAC's membership is, the greater their influence is going to become. Let's not sit on the sidelines any longer. It's time to take action by joining AMAC. Here's how you do it. Visit amac.us/justnews and activate for your 1-year membership for just $1. That's a great deal. Plus, as a member, you'll have access to exclusive discounts on travel, insurance, and restaurants, and more, and enjoy the award-winning AMAC magazine, packed with valuable insights. Also receive free guidance on Social Security, Medicare, and so much more. Join the movement of concerned citizens who are uniting under the AMAC banner to fight for the values on which this nation was built. Visit amac.us/justnews to start your one-year membership for just $1. Join me. I'm a card-carrying member. $1, 1 year. Welcome back, America. A little breaking news here. This just in from the United States Supreme Court. The U.S. Supreme Court has rejected the Biden administration's request to allow it to implement some of the changes it made to the Title IX rules. Those are the rules that are now, if they go into effect, would allow men into women's sports, allow men into women's bathroom, and potentially create penalties for people who misgender, who don't use the proper pronouns. The Supreme Court refused to let those rules go into effect. Even some of them, a major loss for the Biden administration, a win for women's sports right now. At least that's what the proponents will say. We'll have more of that at justthenews.com. Go check it out. Amanda, I think we're going to go back at the back of the show here to where we started this Kamala Harris, her economic speech. Man, even the Washington Post was blowing it up today, saying she's leaning like a communist. We got a great guest that will help walk us through that over the next few minutes, don't we?
We do indeed. Yes. So Vice President Kamala Harris has her economic plan that she has proposed should she win the presidency, and I'm trying to understand how it differs very much from socialism. There are a number of ideas that she's put out over the last few days that people are asking questions about. And as you cited, John, there are numerous economists, including folks over on left-wing networks, who are saying, this might actually be bad. In fact, I think it was Washington Post who said if your opponent is accusing you of being a communist, you might actually not want to put out something like price cap. So I am very excited to bring in our next guest. He is with an incredible organization out here on the West Coast. It is called Pacific Legal Foundation. James Burling, thank you so much for being here.
Hey, it's nice to be with you.
Yeah, good to have you.
Great to see you, sir. I wanted to ask you about some of these economic proposals. I think the one that people envision associated with maybe, the Soviet Union or Venezuela, the one that they envision connected to that the most is price capping at the grocery store, because when you do that, the pressure that it creates on not only the people at the grocery store who are selling the goods, but the suppliers, the supply chain, the entire process of it getting to the customer. It's going to create lines. I mean, that is the nightmare that the American people envision. Why on earth is she throwing this out there as the red meat of her economic policy?
I can only think of two possible scenarios. One, she's the most economically illiterate candidate for higher office in at least a half a century. The second possibility is she knows it can't possibly work, but it's a craven, desperate attempt to get votes from the far left. She cannot possibly believe that this would do anything except create shortages in groceries, shortages in housing supply, shortages in everything. It does nothing to deal with the supply side the inflation. It has everything to do with juicing up demand. And when anybody puts on price controls, you have shortages. Look, we cannot repeal the law of supply and demand. North Korea hasn't been able to figure out how to do it. Venezuela hasn't been able to figure out how to do it. And Kamala Harris is not going to be able to figure out how to overturn the law of supply and demand.
Yeah, really important. James, about 36 years ago this month, I bought my first house. I was in my mid-20s. My wife and I were so excited. And I was at a picnic a couple weeks ago, and there were people in their 20s, 30s, and they're like, we're not even thinking about buying a house. It's just not possible. It's not going to happen in our lifetime. And I thought, oh my God, how much has that part of the American dream just been crushed? Why is it? You just wrote a brilliant article that neither Republicans or Democrats have really been able to solve what's really been a decade-long housing crisis. Tell us what's going on, why we're failing so badly at it.
Yeah, so as I put in my book, Nowhere to Live, The Hidden Story of the America's Housing Crisis, which came out on Tuesday, we have for almost a century failed to allow the supply of new housing to meet the demand. Every year, we're falling further and further behind in supply. And why is that? It's one failed government policy after another. It's too restrictive zoning in so many areas where you cannot build the starter homes that you and I bought back in the 70s or 60s whenever you bought your first starter home. You cannot simply build those kind of homes. Where you try to get so far in the process to build homes, you get sued with environmental regulations. On top of that, vast amounts of the country have been taken off limits to building homes because of wetlands, endangered species habitat, viewshed corridors, open space corridors, agriculture corridors, whatever. It's taking land out of production, and we can no longer build the homes that people need. And no amount of price controls or no amount of subsidies to buyers is going to help solve that problem until we allow the homes to be built that people need to be built.
Important.
Yeah. I drive around my neighborhood here in Los Angeles and I see signs advocating for rent control, and I just think to myself, it's a failure of our education system. Speaking of that failure of our education system, this new notion, a $25,000 boost for first-time homeowners, it's not going to be the seller who absorbs that cost. It's not going to be the broker. It's not going to be the lender. Who's actually going to be paying for the $25,000 credit?
Oh, I am. And you are. And everybody who pays taxes are going to end up paying for that. And that credit is not going to actually do much good in the end, because every time government juices up something with all kinds of government money that it shovels out, the price of that thing goes up because people realize there's more money floating around and we can raise prices. Look, it happened in education with the very generous student loan policies that now nobody can pay back. But prices of education, higher education, went way, way higher and faster than inflation because of all the money that was being juiced into it. And if you have this home buying credit that we're going to pay for as taxpayers, it's going to juice up the price of housing even further, and it's not going to solve the problem, which is a supply problem. We have to get rid of all these onerous rules and regulations that make it impossible to build homes where people want to live. And in my book, Nowhere to Live, I talk about this and I go through the history. And every government program, as I point out in my book, pretty much fails.
Yeah, it is amazing. And it's been a cascading set of failures for so long. If you're a young person and you're looking at this election and thinking, I might try to get a home someday, but mortgage rates are too high, prices keep going up, supply keeps going down. What are some of the bright hopes? Do you see anyone on the horizon, on the political scene and the economic scene, that's talking the right way or beginning to think about the solutions that you propose in your great book?
Yeah, I think there are more and more people waking up to the origins of the problem. We have people now in California that show up to hearings. It used to be for hearings for building some homes. It used to be everybody would come up opposed to it because they didn't want it in their backyard. Now people are coming to hearings, young people especially, say, yeah, build that because I need a place to live and I can't afford anything right now. You know, my kids are good jobs, but they can't afford anywhere near the sort of housing that I had at their age. And it's getting worse and worse. And people are beginning to realize, hey, the government's not helping with this. And rent control, you mentioned a minute ago, oh my God, every economist of any stature that's looked at rent control will tell you it fails. It fails to keep housing prices down, and indeed, it raises houses. It raises the price of housing in the end because it creates a disincentive for building new homes. Therefore, supply is constrained, demand is the same. If you have supply and demand in tension, prices go up. Simple as that.
Absolutely.
Simple economics.
And it's not just home purchasing, it's renting too. It all is just kind of a vicious cycle. Here in California, I think we are up to 181,000 homeless. It's 28% of the entire country. And sir, I just really wish that they would put you at the head of a task force to try to alleviate this. And everybody, you need to go check out his book. Yeah, Nowhere to Live, The Hidden Story of America's Housing Crisis. James Burling, thank you so much for your wisdom here, sir. We're going to have you back on again very soon. One more segment to get to, and then we're going to break some news, and then we'll be out for the weekend. See you in a moment. Welcome back, everybody. I'm going to stay in a California state of mind. Speaking of the sheriff who we just had on a few minutes ago, I actually had him on my podcast, and this is a shameless plug for John Solomon, Just the News Podcast Network, because he has amazing podcasts. Go to justthenews.com and check out all of the ones that he has under his podcast tab. But I had the sheriff on my podcast today as well. And John, we talked about a lot of the immigration issues, but also the fact that California crime under Prosecutor Harris is just going to be exported to the other 49 states under President Harris. And I certainly hope that that is a message that's resonating, that Republicans are really working on tweaking, because it is the truth. And as the sheriff was talking about, this is just, it's been an abysmal failure for California. And I don't think we want to spread that across the other 49. But speaking of law and order, the Milwaukee Police Association endorsed President Trump and J.D. Vance. Yes, law and order is back in style, at least with police associations.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And listen, that anecdote that Sheriff Boudreau told us is so powerful. Listen, you can talk about policies, numbers, and statistics, but Kamala Harris can't take 5 seconds to say thank you to the men and women behind him. And Donald Trump cuts across a field to go say thank you. You can tell which one cares about him. That's why Donald Trump is really racked up just almost every police union endorsement in the country right now. I don't understand why Kamala Harris is running as a law and order person. She's got no chance of doing it. It's about as authentic as me running as an opera singer. It's just not going to happen. So I just don't get it. But listen, she may not be prime time. I think we're starting to see just how lacking in prime time. Some of these early decisions, 2-3 weeks since she's been given a gift, right? She got that sugar high, and she squandered it all with some inexplicable decisions. I don't know. I have a funny feeling this race is going to widen pretty quickly.
I think so, too. And I think that the timing is interesting because she is starting to get squeezed. As Mike Davis was talking about, that sugar high is wearing off. So now she feels compelled to put policies out there. And I swear, when it comes to economic policies, listen, as we were talking about with James, it's not the seller who is going to absorb the cost, or the broker, or the lender, or escrow. It is going to be the American people. And as far as I know, there is not going to be any type of citizenship qualifier. So again, the American people are going to be paying for the spoils of illegal immigrants coming into this country. So congratulations when you take your cute little picture with the cardboard key and the balloons out front of your house and have a great time at your barbecue in the house that the American people paid for. And I just have to think that it's got to be some Gen Zer who was telling her, hey, this is a great policy, throw this out there for the economy. Yeah, no, I think you're right. We were talking to someone, I can't remember who it was now, but who said that Democrats may wish they had Joe Biden back on the ticket before this is all done. And it's been a bumpy start for as managed and as protected as she has been. She's still managing to get lots of negative publicity during her honeymoon. First, buying fake news headlines, right? Tim Walz and all the things they've had to back off with Tim Walz, DUI and false titles in the military and not deploying and giving false stories. And then her first economic policy, which is designed to maybe shift her away from the disaster Bidenomics. And she's got the Washington Post and Obama's economic advisor saying she's off her rocker. What the heck? It has been a bad few days for the Democratic nominee. There's no doubt about it. Hey, speaking of failures, and I thought about this earlier when we were talking about the door seal issue for Vice President nominee J.D. Vance. I just saw an update on the astronauts. I think it was 2 of them that were sent up to the ISS via a Boeing aircraft, and they are stuck up there still, and they are thinking it's not going to be until February when they can come back. It was supposed to be an 8-day trip, and it's going to be extended, I think, beyond 7 months. Boeing is not having a year.
They might have to resurrect the team from Apollo 13 and come up with a better solution because Boeing doesn't seem to have it. Yeah, they're going to be there. It'll be well over a year in space then, which hasn't been done before. Important stuff, things we're going to be watching real closely over the next few months. But another sign of we're just not on our A game in America right now.
Yeah. Hey, send one of those Space Tesla's up there. What is it called? SpaceX? Send a SpaceX up there.
That's
That'll
a good
grab
one.
them in a hurry.
Yeah.
All right, a Space Tesla. All right, everybody. Thanks so much for being with us this week. We're going to be back here on Monday at 6 p.m. Eastern, and I'll be here tomorrow covering President Trump's rally that's going to be taking place in Pennsylvania. I'll see you then, and we will see you on Monday.